Summer Challenge. Sheesh. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Mark Summer Challenge. Today is July 26th, and we are in Mark chapter 13. The entire chapter, Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 37, and the title of this devotional is Be on the Alert, because we're nearing the end of Wednesday of Passion Week, and Jesus is having this long day of teaching, and now he's preparing his disciples for what is to come. What should they expect after he dies on the cross, raises from the dead, and then what should they expect during that period of waiting before he returns again? The disciples are already having a hard time accepting the fact that he has to die and that he will die and raise from the dead. But now they have to accept the fact that there will be a period where there will be disaster and tribulation before he eventually returns. And so Jesus explains that and prepares them for that. His disciples are eager and excited for Jesus to establish his kingdom, but there must be some things that happen first, Jesus says, before that happens. So, what is to come? And in this chapter, we're going to get a brief overview of what is to come. And in this devotional, I'm going to give you just a very brief overview of what's to come, because if we go in depth at all, it's just going to be an hour devotional at least. So I'm just going to give you the highlights, okay? And if you want to study eschatology with me at a later time, maybe we get a group together and we study the end times, and it's going to be very fun. Maybe that could be a cool thing, and we study that together. But for now, for the devotional and for your sake, we'll go fast, okay? Three big things that Jesus highlights in this passage, Mark chapter 13. The first one is disaster. Disaster in verses 1 through 13. Jesus warns his disciples and us today that before he returns, we should expect some really grim days. We should expect some disaster. And this is going to happen in four different areas. Okay, first, Jesus says the temple will be destroyed. And this does happen in AD 70. The temple was at the heart of the religious organization. Remember, all the religious leaders, this is the heart of their hypocrisy. They've totally corrupted the temple. And so Jesus will express his judgment on them by destroying the temple. And that does happen. Secondly, Jesus says, watch out for the false teachers. You know this. False teachers will come, and they will seem good, they will sound good, but their goal will be to deceive many people away from Christ. Maybe what they're saying might sound pretty much true, but they'll sprinkle in some false teaching in there in order to slowly but surely stray people away from Christ. And so he says, beware of them, watch out for them. Be ready for them, because they will come before I return again, and they will claim to be Christ. They will show signs and wonders. They'll look good. They'll promise you things, but they will be false teachers leading you away. So beware of false teachers. Third, Jesus says the world will experience devastation, both politically and naturally. And aren't we seeing this? Okay, there will be wars. There will be political unrest. People will be super angry and going after each other. Politically, it will be a disaster, but also naturally, there will be earthquakes, it says, and we'll experience natural disaster, which we have. It also says there will be famine, and we'll experience famine, and many people will die, and we'll go through that, and aren't we experiencing that? And then it also says, and so all these things will come close, earthquakes, famine, wars, all these things as the time draws closer and closer where Jesus will return, we'll experience political and natural disaster. And that sounds very familiar, right? The fourth thing in this disaster category that Jesus says is that there will be persecution. And we know this. We can expect this, right? Maybe it's harder for us to understand in America, but if Jesus, the perfect Son of Man who lived perfectly, sinfully, he absolutely righteously, if he experienced death on a cross and suffering and persecution, then we should expect that totally. There would be no reason for us to expect anything less than that. We should expect persecution because we know that the gospel is not popular, right? The world hates Christ. And I've told you over and over again that as we continue to live in this world, the world is becoming more and more wicked, and it will become harder and harder for us to live as Christians in this world who hates Christ, right? This world hates Christ, and for us to live for Christ will become increasingly hard. And so we should expect persecution. But at the end of this section, of verses 1 through 13, Jesus gives us a statement, like a promise, an assurance. Basically, endurance is assurance. And so the believers, only believers, true believers in Jesus Christ, will be able and willing to endure until the end. Only believers in Jesus Christ will be able to go through all of this disaster, and they will prove faithful and true in the end. Endurance is assurance. The fickle, faithless fakes will be drawn out throughout this entire process of disaster leading up to Christ's return. Endurance is assurance. So that's the first thing we see. Again, this is just an overview, and we're already going long. Number one is disaster, verses 1 through 13. Secondly, we'll see tribulation. Verses 14 through 23, Jesus talks about the tribulation. So after all this disaster, suddenly, one day, all the believers here on earth will be snatched up with Jesus to heaven. And this is called the rapture, right? In a second, in a moment, instantly, out of nowhere, all believers will be raptured up with Jesus to heaven, and then the tribulation will begin. And the tribulation is God's judgment on this earth, where his wrath will be on display, where evil will be unrestrained. We'll see an increase in demonic activity. It'll be terrible. It'll be disastrous here on this earth for the tribulation. Whoever remains on this earth will experience the beginning of this tribulation, and this is a time where God will pour out his wrath and judgment over all the earth. Satan will be unrestrained, demonic activity increase, people will experience evil like they never have before, and this will be a scary time. Okay, so this is the tribulation. Again, much more to go into, but that's a brief overview. Thirdly, then we'll get to the return of Christ in verses 24 through 37. After the disaster and tribulation, Jesus will return. And this is what every believer longs for, hopes for, should expect, that Jesus will return. But get this, Jesus, in his first coming to earth, came as a baby. He is the humble, suffering servant. But when he returns again, he will not return as a suffering servant, but as the glorious King who will rule this earth, this nation. He will establish his kingdom, and we will reign with him forever. This is great news and something we should long for and hope for. Jesus returning as the glorious and righteous King. And then Jesus gives us one final invitation, one final warning, and that's the title of our devotional: Be on the alert. Why? Because all of these things that we just described, they are coming, they are already unfolding, and they will happen in an instant when you least expect it. And so the question is, are you ready? Are you ready? If you're an unbeliever, if you haven't turned to Christ yet, will you turn to Christ? And will you receive his forgiveness and his grace? Or will you accept the fact that you will go through hell, you will go through the tribulation and an ultimate judgment in hell? Is that something you want to accept? Or if you are a believer, will you prepare yourself? Will you draw even closer to Christ? Endurance is assurance. Will you be able to endure? And all true believers will be able to endure, but we have to prepare ourselves and draw closer and closer to Christ. So you either need to turn to Christ for the first time, or you need to draw nearer to him. And I hope that you will do just that. Okay, so you could study these events described in this one chapter alone for years and years and never even get to the very end of it. But what we saw in this chapter is sweet, it is true, it is coming, and so we must prepare. I've got 3 questions for you. Number 1, what is expected to happen before the rapture and tribulation? So what is expected to happen during that disaster period, during really this period? Number 2, what will the tribulation be like? What will the tribulation be like? And number 3, why does Jesus say that we should be on the alert? Why should we be on the alert? Okay? That's our devotional for today. The things to come. Be on the alert. Mark chapter 13. We're on July 26th, so it means we've only got a few more days left in the Mark Summer Challenge. You're doing a great job. Some of you have already finished the challenge, technically, but keep going, okay? Do perfectly. See you tomorrow. Bye.